Yeah, hi folks. Now, the other day, Lee from Cross the Rubicon did a great video about that lying piece of trash, Kate Hanna from the Disinformation Project, who spewed out garbage relating to the Posey Parker visit. And I'll cover that in a moment, but first, about a month or so ago, a New Zealand media outlet tried to claim that this OK sign is a white supremacist sign, and that Posey Parker used it. Now folks, I don't know if this is fake or not. You decide.
I tell you what, Chris.
Using a hand signal linked to white supremacists, which we've chosen to blur.
Revoke my visa at your peril.
Now folks, this is what really happened. Now watch closely folks, and you'll see she is pulling on her zipper. She's adjusting her zipper.
I tell you what, Chris. Tell you what, Mr. Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins. Let me just tell you this. Revoke my visa at your peril. I mean, the media in New Zealand is nuts. They just lied. I mean, they didn't exaggerate. They didn't just exaggerate. They didn't just extrapolate. They actually lied. They blurred my hand and pretended I was doing a white power signal.
Yes, the media in New Zealand are dirty, filthy liars, and so is Kate Hanna.
Hi there people, how's it going? This is Cross the Rubicon channel. I was sent a video about half an hour ago, and it's all for TVNZ News yesterday sometime, where the woke journalist interviews Kate Hanna. Now Kate Hanna works for the Disinformation Project in New Zealand, government funded to hunt out and destroy, character assassinate neo-Nazis,
Fictional neo-Nazis.
far right or whatever, and basically anybody who's not that, and brand them as something they're not in order to destroy them. So Kate Hanna spoke about with this lunatic journalist who said this is a real yuck conversation to be having. They spoke about the rise in violence against the LGBTQ community and transgenders since the Posey Parker visit a couple of months ago. And it just, honestly, just watching this rubbish, this verbal diarrhea coming out of this woman who is a liar. She's a liar.
A dirty, filthy liar.
She does this to earn money. She lies to New Zealand. And she's saying basically there's a genocide. She literally says there's a genocide against the trans community in New Zealand. Would you believe that? And it's being driven by the neo-Nazis in New Zealand that are being controlled from outside New Zealand. And they're using Russian disinformation tactics against the trans community. I mean, for honestly, what kind of a lunatic comes out with this garbage?
A dangerous one.
New Zealand has not got a neo-Nazi problem at all. I don't know any. Honestly, I really don't. What she calls neo-Nazis are, like I said earlier, people who refuse to take the... That's what she calls neo-Nazis and the far right. And now they're committing acts of violence against the trans community. It's all absolute diarrhea. And yet people watch this, stupid people watch this, and they believe it. They soak it up and really do believe that people who don't particularly like what's happening with transgender men going into schools and doing story times in schools and libraries and getting their tackle out and doing these really provocative acts in front of school children. So if you don't like that and you're against that, that means you're a neo-Nazi. And
Yeah, so that must mean half of New Zealand are neo-Nazis. Now here's part of that interview.
We're seeing more and more hate towards trans people in Aotearoa, according to new research out this morning from the Disinformation Project. Online forums with international influence are being filled with increasingly more hate, and the tone is much more violent than in the past. It really is quite scary. Kate Hanna of the Disinformation Project joins us now. Morena, Kate, thank you for being here.
Morena.
What a yucks topic to be talking about, but it's an important research that has come out that we need to be talking about. So tell me about
Yeah, clear your throat.
the information that you were able to glean from this project.
Yeah, so what we did is there's two critical findings to what we've done over the last couple of months. So we'd heard that from trans community members that they'd experienced a rise in hate and harm after the visit of Posie Parker to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so we wanted to look at our data and see if that was true in our data, to see what the evidence base was for that. And so what we did find was that there had been a substantial increase in harm and hate towards trans and non-binary people over the period middle of March to the middle of April, so over a month-long period, which coincided with Parker's visit. And really importantly, that increase was both in amount, so quantity of harmful and hateful content, but also in what we would call tone. So that's an elevated level of violence, an elevated level of harm. And some of the language that was used is language that we would call genocidal and that other researchers internationally classify as genocidal. So that's language that denies the right of a group of people to exist.
Wow. On one hand, I'm thinking it's the topic itself isn't great to be, talking about, but actually this backs up what the trans community is actually saying, which I think on one hand is really important for that to be acknowledged with stats, with the research that actually backs all of that up, right?
Well, show it.
Yeah, it's super important for communities to be able to have access to the evidence that tells the story of their lived experience. So that's why we engaged with looking at our content. But there were some secondary findings which are also really of concern to all New Zealanders. And that was findings around the use of tools and tactics to do with online communities and online networks, which seem to mimic some of the features of known features of foreign interference or foreign influence.
Yep.
And so one of the really critical ones was in the time period just prior to Parker's arrival in New Zealand, when she'd already been in Australia, we saw a big wave of neo-Nazi content being posted into New Zealand's social media platforms. And it was at a level that we've not seen before. And interestingly, New Zealand's own white supremacist and neo-Nazi and far-right groups and individuals also posted much more content in the same time period.
Yeah, and so did One News and News Hub, so they must be neo-Nazis as well. Now, why doesn't Kate Hanna report on the real hate?
So what you guys just saw in that video was a man, part of the trans community, attacking an elderly woman. Man, manners and decency has gone out the window in the society. What are we teaching these young people? What are we teaching them? That it's okay to beat up elderly people? Why? Because she doesn't like your ideology. She's there to support Posey Parker and women. So what do? You attack her? Shame on you, man.
Yeah, you're right, but they're not men. They're gutless, woke thugs. Now, folks, the disinformation industry is global woke totalitarianism.
Michael Schellenberger, always great to see you and have you here on Outsiders. Thank you so much for coming on today. Woke totalitarianism, how serious is the threat in your mind?
It's good to be with you, Rowan. Good to see you again. Well, this is extremely alarming. It only dawned on us 2 weeks ago that there was a coordinated international effort to expand government censorship of ordinary citizens on online social media and internet platforms, namely Google, Facebook, Twitter. I think the most dangerous is the European Union, because the idea there, this is the openly hoped for idea among European bureaucrats and censors and their allies in other countries, is that they'll impose censorship that will then be effectively global censorship on those platforms because the EU is such a big player. But we've also seen Ireland, the lower house of the parliament has passed a law that would effectively criminalize thought. It would actually presume guilty that anybody in possession of so-called hateful materials would be assumed to be in the business of distributing those hateful materials and criminalizing materials that bureaucrats decide is hateful. This is the trend, is that idea that what they're saying in these governments, and it's also Brazil, Canada, United States, Great Britain, where we're seeing, Australia, New Zealand, where we're seeing this simultaneous demand for greater censorship online, is some claim that it needs to be done because of hate speech. But in every one of those countries, hate speech is on decline. It's been in decline for decades.
Rita.
Well, you got an insight into this with the Twitter files when you went through those documents and saw how this is already playing out. Tell us a little bit about that, and for this new industry that's come up, this censorship, or you can even almost call it a disinformation industry that is being subsidised by taxpayers.
Yeah, that's right. So you may remember in December when we first started reporting the Twitter files, there was certainly a lot of just what you would call woke enforcement of censorship. So if you said someone, a friend of ours, Megan Murphy, said, but a man is not a woman, and that's all she said, and she was kicked off of Twitter. There was a lot of that stuff. But then we increasingly started to see people from the FBI, people from the CIA, people from the Department of Homeland Security demanding that material be censored, that people be deplatformed. The story changed for us. We realized the extent to which we had government officials involved in censorship efforts in the United States. We now know that that was also going on in other countries, including in Ireland, including in Canada. We know also in Australia and New Zealand it's going on. I think we're at the beginning of it. I don't think it's fully set in, but they keep using the same arguments around trans, around race, around climate change.
Yeah, so it looks like climate change will be censored in New Zealand as well. Yeah, now folks, there appears there is now a white supremacy emoji out there. Anyway, folks, I've posted all the relevant links below.